Hello, my name's John Tennant, and I'm here to show you another demo of Synesthesia being triggered with Wwise and applied to some visual effects, some Niagara effects, some Cascade effects, and some lighting. And I'm doing it all via blueprints. There's no code, and I'm going to run through all of it with you. There's 3 sections, but before I get into the 3 sections, I'll play you the effect, and then we'll talk about it. So, as you can plainly see, it's a particle accelerator, science experiment, electricity arcing, mad scientist kind of thing. And there are 3 components that I'm going to talk about here. First one's obviously the beam. And then the second one is how the lights are dimming as the beam ramps up in intensity, like it's stealing power away from the grid, from the rest of the building. And the third thing is the arcing on the left and right hand side here. And the arcing is being triggered by the same audio file that's driving the beam visual effects and the light visual effects. So let's dig in and take a look. I'll show you what I did. So this is all a blueprint. Here's the blueprint here. And I started with an asset pack made by Silver Tim from the Unreal Marketplace. He designed the whole level, and I used that as a starting point. So from there, I added the sound effects, and I created the Niagara effects and a couple Cascade effects, or just one Cascade effect copied twice. And then I added it all to this blueprint. So I'm using 3 audio kinetic components in this blueprint. The first one's obviously right in front of us here. It's the beam effect. And the other 2 are on the left and right ends of the beams. And they're basically for the rotary mechanical sounds and the sparks. That gives it the positioning. So let's just go in and take a look at how I got the beam set up here. All right. So first thing we do, I'm just going to run through the logic. I'm not going to go into too much detail because that would probably put most of you to sleep. But if you have any questions, post them in the comments and I'm happy to answer. So first thing is just starting all the audio. Nothing fancy there. I'm using a Wwise callback to read a marker from the beginning of the beam sound effects file. And every time that beam sound effects file begins playing, it starts this timeline, which is basically spitting out a duration. It's spitting out just the elapsed time since the start of the file. And I'm using that as a kind of workaround to, because I'm not using the internal UE4 audio engine. And this was the best way I could figure out how to do it. I'm pretty sure there's a better way, but I couldn't figure it out, and this worked okay, so I went forward with this. And so that duration is just used to tell Unreal where to look in the loudness NRT and the constant Q NRT files associated with the beam audio to drive the visual effects. So yeah, get normalized loudness at time, beam audio playback duration here, and that's just it. Duration hack, beam audio playback duration, and this inside this timeline, it's just it's really simple. It's just a keyframe at 0 and a keyframe at 31.63, which is the length of the audio file, and it just outputs a 1-for-1 ratio, x equals y. That's the curve. So this is just some math that I'm doing to take the values being spit out by the loudness NRT file and the constant Q NRT files and turn them into something that can be read by Niagara. And this is how you send stuff to Niagara right here. Any VFX artist will know how to do this, but it took me a long time because I'm not a VFX artist. So I'm controlling two parameters for the beam in Niagara, beam thickness and the jitter. And what that looks like in Niagara is like this. Under user exposed, you create your variables that you want to use to control things. And then you just drag it over. So that I just drag that to there, and I can control the jitter amount with a variable that's being driven by the loudness of an audio file. And the same with beam thickness. You just drag it over. So once I had the beam set up, I realized that what I really wanted to do would be to dim the lights when the beam got really powerful, because it's sucking the electricity out of the building, like when you turn on the kettle or turn on the air conditioning, or turn them both on at the same time in my studio and blow the fuse. Anyway, so this is the level blueprint, and I'm just going to run you through how I set up the dimming of the lights. So on the event begin play, I'm just grabbing the lights that I want to dim and adding them to an array. And I've got the point lights in one array, the spotlights in another array. And this ugly business here are all of the fluorescent lights being added to a big giant array. There's probably a more elegant way to do this, but sometimes brute force is where it's at, and it gets things done. So luckily we can collapse it. All right, so now that I've got the arrays on the tick, I'm evaluating the loudness of the beam. So this is the science beam contraption thing. That's this blueprint here, and I'm getting the beam SFX loudness, which is a published variable right here, and I'm doing a little bit of math to it to make it so that it only at the very top of the scale, only when it gets near 1, will it really start to dim the lights. Otherwise, it's just kind of make them flicker a little bit. But as it approaches 1, the lights go further and further down. So it turns out that to do that with much experimentation, I just use an exponent. This is the same set of logic for the point lights as it is for the spotlights. And then this stuff down here is how I did the fluorescent lamps. So the way I did this is that I'm just watching the value, and when it hits 1, which is the maximum loudness, I trigger a do once here, and I take that lamp mesh array, and I'm just hiding the fluorescent lights message. I'm just flicking them off. That seemed to be the easiest way to do it, and they're far away, so it didn't really seem to matter too much whether or not I did it elegantly or not, and it seemed to work okay. But I'm randomly leaving about 10% of the lights on. So this for each loop's running, and it runs for each of the lamps. And for some of them, it won't work. It's just gonna branch out onto the false there 10% of the time. And then once the lamps are done flickering off, I go in and turn them back on again right here. Boom. So that's how the lights were done. And the final component, I'll show you that just so you can check that out before I go into the last thing. You can see about 10% of the lights stay on. Gives it a little bit of randomness. What I'd really like to do is get the lights to kind of flicker individually, not be all kind of on and off at the same time, but what can you do? There's only so much time in the day. So the final component is the arcing, and the arcing's kind of cool because what's going on is I'm using the beam sound effects. When it reaches peak loudness, I'm triggering the arcing, the Cascade visual effects, the sparks on either side of the beam from here and here, and the sound effects. So it's a sound effect triggering another sound effect and obviously a visual effect too, which I thought is kind of neat. So that looks like this. It's similar to the way that the fluorescent lamps flick on and off, in that I'm waiting for the loudness of the beam to hit 1, and when it does, I'm just activating some Cascade visual effects here. And there's just a bit of randomness here to make it so it's not the same every time. A little bit of a random delay between the first one and the second one, and an early out here, so that about 20% of the time the second one doesn't fire. And that's it for this demo. If you've made it this far, it means you're probably as excited as I am about this tech. I think this sort of thing only really scratches the surface of what we're going to be able to do with it, especially when we get visual effects artists working together with sound designers to create some really next level stuff. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll dig into it with you.